Hello and welcome to another episode of Meanbrews. Today we're covering the style that was voted on by my Reddit viewers, which is Munich Dunkel. Let's get right into the recipe details. I have 25 winning Munich Dunkel recipes, 3 best of shows, 15 gold, of 4 silver and 2 bronze. The BJCP style is characterized by depth, richness, and complexity typical of darker Munich malts with the accompanying Maillard products. Deeply bready, toasty, often with chocolate-like flavors in the freshest examples, but never harsh, roasty, or astringent. A decidedly malt-balanced beer, yet easily drinkable. When I look at the recipes and the data trends over style, there's actually a surprising amount of evolution. We'll walk through that and the different variables that are changing over time, but between the recipes that people are producing, not a lot of variation. For the original gravity, the sweep of recipes that won ranged from 1.046 to 1.061. You can see the average, which is 1.056, is right above the BJCP range. Pretty tight, narrow range there for BJCP, but obviously the bigger beers are standing out in competition. Once again, I'm going to show where my recipe is going to be, and I'm going to shoot for around 1 point under the average, and I'll show you why here on this slide. So we're seeing a change in time, a slight change with Pearson's correlation coefficient of negative 0.25, of a decrease in original gravity, somewhere around 1.055, so I shot for just under the 1.056 average. IBUs, again, a big sweep between 13 and 30. The average is right on the mid-range of 23, and that's what I'm going for with my recipe. For the color, surprisingly, the average is just under the mean, or the median, between the BJCP values of 18.5, and I'm shooting for 20 with my recipe. For the malt percentages, the average was 93.3% base malt, 2.6% crystal, 1.9% toast, and 2.1% roast. When you look at the recipes that used those specific malts, we had anywhere between 72 and 100% of base malts in some recipes, with the average right around, say, 92%. Only about 80% of the recipes used a roasted malt, at an average of less than 5. Less than that, about 45% used a crystal malt, an average of about 5 or 6. Toasted malts even less than 30%, with an average of about 6% as well, all the way up to 20% on toasted malts. I plan to be around 96% on my base malts. When you zoom in on the roasted, toasted, and crystal malts, you can kind of see the sweep a little bit better. We did cover that in the last slide, so I won't harp on this one too much. We'll show you, I plan to put around 3%, 2% of roasted malts. I do not plan to use any crystal or toast malts in this recipe. And the reason why I'm not using any crystal is we're seeing a trend in time of just people not using it. Very prolific. Very early on, I think before Munich malts were readily available in the United States, or good Munich malts, people would supplement that with some crystal and some toasted malts, but it's just not needed nowadays with the readily available multiple light and dark Munichs that you can get in the market. Base malts, the most prolific was Munich 1. 85% of the recipes used light Munich or Munich 1 if you use environment malts, at an average of 63% of the grist. The next most prominent is dark Munich. 58% of the recipes used dark Munich, at an average of 45% of the grist. Pilsner, for its diastatic power, 46% of the recipes included some Pilsner, at an average of 26% of the grist. You typically add Pilsner because of its diastatic power, again, because the Munich malts have a less ability to convert the starches to sugars. Where I plan to be on my recipes is to be right around 42% of Munich 1 and the same of Munich 2. You might ask why I'm equally distributing those, and I'll show you in a second. And then right at about 14%, somewhere around there, of Pilsner malt. I don't plan to use any Vienna or wheat. That's just not prolific enough to warrant using it in the Meanbrews recipe. When you look at the light and dark Munich, the blue curve and the blue dots are Munich 1 or light Munich, and the orange dots and orange trend line is dark Munich or Munich 2. Kind of see that they're converging right around equal parts. I wouldn't say 60% because you can't get 120% in a recipe, but equal parts of each is where they are converging to, which I think is why, or which is the reason why in my recipe I plan to use equal parts light and dark Munich. Very interesting. The Munich 2, the dark Munich trend is much more convergent than the light Munich trend, but they're both kind of getting to around the same equal parts of the recipe. Crystal malts, again, I don't plan to use crystal malts, but I will share the most prominent was Care Munich, or a medium crystal. 31% of the recipes used a Care Munich malt at an average of 5.1% of the grist, all the way up to about 9.5% of the grist. Also had light crystal and carapils as other malts used in right around 12% or less of the recipes. Toasted malts, melanoidin is the most prolific. We had about 15% of the recipes used the melanoidin, probably at around 4% of the grist, and then aromatic, victory, and special roast in very small percentages of recipes. I don't plan to use any toasted malts in my recipe. Roast malts, big sweep here between 1% and more than 12% for chocolate or Carafa special, with an average of, 69% of the recipes used a chocolate type malt and an average of 2.8% of the grist. And then black malt and black Prinz were some other malts used in a couple recipes each. I plan to use somewhere around 2% in my recipe. This is just a color adjuster, not really there to get any roasted flavors. Bittering hops, the most prolific was Haller Mittelfrüh, followed by Magnum, Hersbrucker, Tet, Satz, Spalt, Liberty, and Ultra, mostly continental European hops, majority of them German. So I plan to use Haller Mittelfrüh for my bittering hop addition. Flavor hops, Haller Mittelfrüh, more than 3/4 of the recipes that used the flavor hop used Haller Mittelfrüh, followed by Hersbrucker, Satz, and Tet. I do plan to use the Haller Mittelfrüh flavor hop. Aroma hops, equally split between Hersbrucker, Crystal, and Mittelfrüh. I do not plan to use an aroma hop in my recipe. For the rates of hop additions, again, 50% of the recipes used a flavor hop, which is the blue curve. So 50% of the recipes at an average of 0.11 ounce per gallon or 0.82 grams per liter. Only 12% used aroma hops at 0.13 ounce per gallon or 0.97 grams per liter. I'm just going to follow the data here and hop with a flavor hop at 0.11 ounce per gallon in my recipe. Do not plan to use aroma hop, just data doesn't support it. The likelihood of using a flavor hop is increasing over time. We're seeing this is years, and these are the recipes that use them. We're seeing that is increasing to more and more likely that recipes will use a flavor hop addition. So more supports the argument to include a flavor hop addition in this style. The mash types, 64% used a decoction mash, 14% a step mash. So more than 3/4 when you add all this up, used some sort of temperature ramping method, which I think is good for this style. Only 23% used a single infusion mash. I plan to do a decoction mash with my recipe. For the mash rest for this style, we didn't have any acid rest. I think you get that with your dark malts. You get the pH you need. So not really needed. 52% did a protein rest at an average of 127 Fahrenheit or 53 Celsius for an average of 30 minutes. 52% again did a beta rest at 147 Fahrenheit, 64 Celsius for an average of 50 minutes. And for the alpha rest, the main saccharification rest, the average temperature was 155 Fahrenheit or 68 Celsius for an average of 40 minutes. I plan to do a protein rest at 130, a beta rest at right on the average of 147, and an alpha rest at 155, pretty much staying with the Meanbrews data I'll explain why this in a second. One thing to note, these durations are pretty long. This is a 90-minute mash, 120 if you include the protein rest, but you have a very low diastatic power with these Munich malts, and this is really ensures that you're getting the conversion you need. It's also a decoction mash, and decoctions just take longer. So keep that in mind. Don't try to shorten it. I think you might have a problem with, conversion if you try to shorten your mash durations. The reason why I'm increasing the temperature on my protein rest is that we're seeing an evolution quite strangely. Usually for modern styles, we see a decrease in the duration of the protein rest because it's shown that we're getting better conversion or better modified malts to be used. So you really don't need that long protein rest. But we're also seeing an increase in the temperature from 127 was the average to somewhere around in the 130s, low 130s. I think it's getting more common to do that protein rest in the lower 130s than in the mid 120s. So I'm shooting for 130 for my protein rest, and I'm gonna still shoot for around 30 minutes just to help with that conversion that we talked about earlier. Boil duration, the average was 79 minutes, and I'm shooting for a 90-minute boil here. For the yeast used, most prolific was the Bach yeast, White Labs 833, which is Eyinger strain. The next most prolific was Weihenstephan 206, which is the Oktoberfest strain of yeast. 50% of the recipes are those two strains. White Labs 838, which is I'm not going to butcher this name, but the station number 308, another lager strain, and then 830, which is 3470. Big bulk of the recipes use those four strains. Some others that were in single recipes were the Augustiner. One of the older recipes used a yeast culture kit company, YCKC L09, origin unknown. If somebody knows it, put it in the comments. I'm really curious. White Labs 920, which is the old Bavarian strain, 4% or one recipe. The Pilsner Kale strain was used in one, and then the Lager X, which rhymes with Index, White Labs 835. If you're curious why they call it Lager X, it's because it rhymes with the brewery they got it from. That was used in one recipe as well. I plan to use the Bach strain for this style. And another thing that supports the use of that yeast is the recipes that have used it in modern winters. It's just really just spiking from nothing at all to almost every recipe is using this yeast strain that's winning. So lots of support to say 833 is a preferred strain for this style. Water chemistry, pretty big sweep here. For calcium, we're anywhere between 20 and 170. I think they were putting in some slaked lime or calcium carbonate for some of the recipes to bring the pH up. 72 is the average. 4 parts per million magnesium. 20 was the average for sodium. 54 sulfate. 76 chloride, which puts that chloride to sulfate ratio in the malty category versus the hoppy, which I think is relevant for this style. Where I plan to be is on the low end of calcium, low end of magnesium, right on the money for sodium, low for sulfate and chloride as well, sticking with the chlorides over the sulfates. And I'll explain why I'm on the low end here. When we're looking at the sulfate and chloride trends over time, we see the majority of the recipes do have the chlorides over the sulfates, but this is decreasing with time. So I'm trending down from the averages on both of those components of the water chemistry. Fermentation temperatures, I'm looking at the top 3 yeast strains as well as all the yeast strains combined. The average was 50.3 for when you look at all the lager yeasts that were used. For the Bach yeast, the one I plan to use, anywhere between 45 and 52 with an average of around 49. Very similar for the 3470, 46 to 52, same average. The Oktoberfest strain, warmer, 50 to 55. Wonder if that's because it's a temperamental strain of yeast with an average of 53. I plan to use the box strain and ferment my primary at 49 degrees. Lager duration, I know I didn't show a curve here, but I wanted to show you how over time the duration of lagering this style has decreased from somewhere, even as high as 90 to settling out around 30 days or about a month. So I think lagering this style, a month of lagering is perfect for getting a competition-ready beer. Other variables, the average carbonation volume was 2.5 and the average mash pH was 5.4. All right, let's get into the Meanbrews recipe. I plan to, again, split the Munich malts, Munich 1 and Munich 2, 42% each, right at 14% Pilsner malt, just to get some diastatic power in. And then I plan to use, I've tried all the the Caraffa and Caraffa Special malts, and the one that I like the best is Caraffa Special 3, which is why my recipe is a little bit darker than the other ones, and I'm going to use around 2% of Caraffa Special 3. It just provided the best flavor for me out of all 6 of the Weyermann roasted malts for Caraffa. I'm going to bitter with 20 IBUs of Haller Mittelfrüh at 60 minutes, and then 0.12 ounce per gallon of Mittelfrüh at 10 minutes, or 2.25 grams per liter. It might not be right. I'll put it in. Make sure you look at the recipe on Brewfather. Don't go by this number. I might not have converted that correctly. The yeast again, White Labs 833, German Bock lager yeast. I plan to shoot for original gravity of 1.055 and right at 24 IBUs, 23, 24. The water chemistry, again, 30 parts per million calcium, 3 magnesium, 20 sodium, 60 chloride, 30 sulfate, and then whatever my bicarbonates from my source water end up being. I plan to adjust my mash pH to 5.4 and use a decoction mash at 130 Fahrenheit or 54 Celsius for 30 minutes, 147 or 64 Celsius for 50 minutes, and then 155 Fahrenheit or 68 Celsius for 40 minutes, and then do a mash out step at 168 or 170, whatever you mash that out usually. Plan to boil the wort, sparge and then boil the wort for 90 minutes, chill to 49, oxygenate, and pitch at least a 2-liter starter for a 5-gallon batch. Usually I do a double ramp here, especially if my yeast is not immaculately fresh from White Labs or Y yeast. I will do a double starter. You need to pitch big, clean, healthy, viable strain of yeast here. Ferment it at 49, and when you get about 5 points from the final gravity, raise it to 60 for a diacetyl rest or 16 Celsius. Hold it for 2 to 3 days, and then slowly chill it to 32 Fahrenheit or 0 Celsius and lager it for a month. That's what the data says. Transfer it to a keg, bottle, and condition to 2.5 volumes, and then serve. All right. That's the end of today's episode. The next video is going to be a style called Australian Sparkling Ale. And this one's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to bring on a guest speaker, I think, who has some experience with historical varieties. He's given me some data from some commercial breweries that we're going to really compare how the commercial recipes do against the winners at competition. So it'll be a little bit different recipe, and we'll have a guest speaker on and kind of walk through the style and how it's evolved. And I think it'll be an interesting one, so make sure you tune in to the next episode. See you in a couple weeks. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.